Good afternoon, and welcome to this SSPC webinar. Before I start, I would like to thank SSPC for the opportunity to present some of the research from the Peptide Synthesis Laboratory at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, or CSI. My name is Marc de Vaucel. I'm from the chemistry department at our CSI. In this presentation, I will speak of peptides used as drug candidates. Here is an overview of my presentation. I will start with a brief introduction on peptides and some of their applications. I will then illustrate one of these applications with one particular type of peptides which were used as part of collaborations that the lab developed with other groups. I will then present the research led by the CSI Peptide Lab using another class of peptides. Finally, I will give an overview of the SSPC research project currently developed in the Peptide Lab. The name peptide comes from a Greek word meaning small digestible. This term reflects the origin from the first peptides identified at the start of the 20th century as intermediate in the digestion of proteins. Peptides have of course an important role in nutrition, but they are much more than just digestive intermediates between proteins and amino acids. They are ubiquitous in living organisms and are involved in all body function. In fact, it is expected that there is no biological activity that cannot be fulfilled by a peptide, and this principle has been behind the rationale of their use as drug candidates. For example, there are currently 791 endogenous peptides identified in humans. These peptides have broad regulatory functions, ranging from immunity to blood pressure and pain control, as well as anti-cancer activity. But these known sequences are probably only the tip of an iceberg of endogenous peptides. For example, when the sequencing of the human genome was completed at the start of this century, the annotation methods used identified protein coding regions in only 1% of the genome. Small open reading frames encoding small proteins and peptides were not captured by these methods, and it is expected that hundreds to thousands of them are existing but currently unknown. They have been described as the dark matter of the human proteome. In addition to their occurrence in nature, peptides can also be synthesized. These synthetic peptides are generally used as research tools, but have also important applications as components of biomaterials, drug delivery systems, nanomedicines, as well as therapeutic candidates in their own right. And it is on the latter application that I will focus on today. When considering the typical sizes of therapeutic entities, peptides are between low molecular weight drugs and antibodies. They are not halfway between them, as they are closer to small molecules than antibodies, but they combine some of the advantages of these two types of agents. So, as small molecules, peptides can be synthesized, and as proteins or antibodies, they are able to interact with their targets over large surface areas and accordingly display high selectivities. While peptides had a relatively turbulent history as drug candidates, they are now considered as one of the fastest growing classes of new drugs. For example, their compound annual growth rate is now similar to the one of small molecules, which traditionally have been the main source of drugs. Last year, the sales of peptide-based drugs exceeded $70 billion, and there are currently 234 therapeutic peptide candidates, most of them in early phases of clinical trials, but nearly a quarter of this number already approved for clinical use. Peptides, as therapeutic entities, can still have a number of limitations, such as low or even no bioavailability and metabolic stability. Their production cost, because of the number of synthetic steps required for their assembly, is significantly higher than for low molecular weight drugs. However, in the last 30 years, a number of approaches have been developed to address these difficulties, using techniques of formulation, delivery, and modification. They include, for example, the application of implantable osmotic pumps, subcutaneous polymeric depot technologies as well. I am mentioning here also the prodrug approach and the peptidomimetic conversion, as I will discuss these in more details later in this presentation. The cost of peptide therapeutics is of course high, but could become less significant as the demand for these relatively large molecules increase. For example, the chemical development of enfuvartide, a 36 amino acid peptide used in the treatment of infections caused by drug-resistant HIV, has resulted in a tenfold reduction in the prices of peptide synthesis reagents over a 4-year period. There are still some problems associated with the synthesis of peptides, such as the requirements for solvents which are listed on the European Commission's list of restricted substances, and I will come back to this point at the end of the presentation. I will now start to present some of the research of the ORCSI Peptide Lab by focusing initially on collaborative projects. The lab was established in 2000 as a national facility for peptide synthesis. It has since participated in a number of internal and external collaborations, both in Ireland and abroad. In 2019, the lab joined the SF5 Research Center SSPC. This facility can synthesize peptides and modify peptides and has a portfolio of products and services similar to the one of a commercial custom synthesis company. To present some examples of collaborations that the lab had in the past, I have selected one particular type of peptides used to form peptide conjugates. While it is often mentioned that one of the main disadvantages of peptides is their lack of membrane permeability, one of the main agents used to enhance the translocation of membrane impermeable agents is actually a peptide. This peptide belongs to the class of cell-penetrating peptides, which can not only cross biological membranes, but also promote the entry in cells of agents ranging from low molecular weight drugs to nanoparticles. These peptides have been used to deliver cargoes such as therapeutic moieties or imaging agents inside cells. And in the next slides, I will present some examples of this conjugate. For example, the cargo can be a small molecule drug, while the peptide is an oligoarginine, a sequence completely assembled from arginine only. In this particular case, the peptide not only acts as a carrier, but can also contribute to the wound healing properties of the conjugate as a source of nitric oxide upon metabolism. In this other example, the cargo is an imaging agent as a near-infrared probe conjugated to a peptide which consists in a nuclear localizing sequence, the conjugate being used for targeted intracellular delivery. Here, the cargo is still an imaging agent, but a metal complex of higher molecular weight, and the peptide is again a simple oligoarginine to promote cell uptake. Significantly increasing the size of the cargo now to about 100 nanometers, this conjugate uses a cyclodextrin as a carrier itself for a nucleic acid such as RNA. The peptide conjugate, in turn, based again on oligoarginine, can be used for the delivery of nucleic acids in gene therapy. Finally, using large cargoes such as liposomes, the same peptide can be used to deliver macromolecules, including proteins and nucleic acids. I will now move from the examples of collaborative projects to an overview of the projects led by the Peptide Lab since 2005. All these projects are taking place in the context of antibiotic resistance. It is increasingly recognized that antibiotic resistance is a major threat to public health worldwide. The current situation with COVID-19, while being of viral origin, still illustrates how threatening and disruptive infectious disease can be. For antibiotic resistance, it is recognized that if the problem is not addressed, it could cause up to 10 million deaths and more than 80 trillion euros of economic loss per year by 2050. But there is another problem with antibiotics, besides the lack of novel agents. It has been shown that bacteria can become fully resistant to antibiotics in a matter of days, while at the same time, it takes on average 10 to 15 years to develop a new or novel antibiotic. So not only do we need novel antibiotics, but also candidates that can limit or delay the emergence of resistance. It is in this context that antimicrobial peptides, or AMPs, have attracted some significant attention. AMPs are the chemical mediators of innate immunity in living organisms, which is their first line of defense against infection. Of interest, some organisms, such as plants and insects, only have innate immunity to prevent and fight infections, as they cannot produce some antibodies. Yet, these organisms are remarkably resistant to infections, essentially because of the efficiency of AMPs against infectious organisms. But AMPs are not only active against a broad spectrum of pathogens, they have also remained effective against these pathogens over evolutionary periods spanning hundreds of millions of years. And it is expected that this happened because they can target bacteria through multiple mechanisms. So AMPs have a number of advantages, including an ability to delay the emergence of resistance, as well as an activity against both dividing and non-dividing cells, which is not shown by classical antibiotics. Furthermore, they can be combined with these traditional antibiotics and together synergize their activities. But there are also a number of limitations for AMPs, in particular, an unknown systemic toxicity besides their instability in vivo and their high costs of production. There is also the risk that their extensive use as antibiotics could ultimately select bacteria resistant against natural innate immunity peptides. As an attempt to overcome these limitations, the lab has developed a unique approach based on a prodrug strategy. The main aim is to overcome the toxicity of these peptides, but if these prodrugs are using metabolically stable versions of AMPs, such as peptides assembled from D amino acids, this could also address the issue of metabolic stability. Potentially, this approach could also limit the emergence of cross-resistance to natural AMPs for a reason I will explain in the next slide. There remains the issue of production costs, but I will come back to this at the end of this presentation. The prodrugs we have developed consist of an AMP attached to a mask through a linker that can be selectively degraded by a target enzyme. As a prodrug, the AMP is inactive against host cells, so non-toxic, but also against bacterial cells. This gives, therefore, the opportunity to discriminate pathogenic from commensal bacteria, and in turn, to limit the potential selection of cross-resistant strains. At the site of infection only, where the target enzyme is present, the linker is degraded and results in the release of the active peptide in the vicinity of the infectious agent. Here is an example of an AMP prodrug. The peptide itself is shown in red, and in its prodrug form has a reduced net charge which is preventing its activity against bacteria, but also host cells. The peptide is modified with a cephalosporin, shown in blue, not used as an antibiotic but as a mask, as its conjugation reduces the net charge of the peptide by 2 units. When the prodrug reaches the site of infection caused by a bacteria producing an extended spectrum beta-lactamase, an enzyme of resistance against beta-lactam drugs such as cephalosporins, the degradation of the latter induces a cascade of electron movements which result in the release of the peptide with this full net charge. It can then resume its normal activity selectively against the resistant bacteria and only at the site of infection. These prodrugs can in fact target the pathogens that are causing the most important clinical threat currently, such as those that have been coined the escape pathogens listed by the WHO as bacteria requiring the most urgent need for novel antibiotics. The second example is not a prodrug, but an AMP codrug. A codrug is a mutual prodrug of two therapeutic agents, which keep each other inactive. They can therefore mediate the combined delivery of two agents at the same target site. The peptide itself is shown again in red. It is conjugated to 4-amino-phenyl acetic acid, or 4-APAA in blue, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. The linker between these two components is an azo bond which is metabolically stable but selectively degraded by azoreductases. These are enzymes only produced by anaerobic bacteria which are essentially confined to the colon. This is the case of Clostridium difficile, a resistant pathogen which is also causing significant clinical problems. Upon reduction of the azo bond, the net charge of the peptide required for its activity is restored, and 4-APAA is also produced. This results in the combined delivery of an antibiotic and an anti-inflammatory agent, which is important in the treatment of Clostridium difficile associated disease. One of the limitations of this codrug and the prodrug shown before is their structural complexity, which makes the production long and difficult and therefore slow down the optimization process. To address this problem, we have developed some prodrugs which are only composed of peptide sequences and can therefore be assembled and optimized rapidly. Here, the AMP sequence in red is extended with a peptidic linker in green, which constitutes the substrate of a target enzyme. And the promoiety is an oligoglutamate sequence which masks the net charge of the AMP. When the linker is degraded by the target enzyme, the fully active peptide is released at the site of infection. As target enzymes to degrade the linker and release the active peptide, we can use some bacterial enzymes, usually associated with virulence or resistance, or a fungal enzyme. But we have focused in particular on a host enzyme which is mainly found at the site of infection. This is the case of neutrophil elastase, a protease which is found in high concentrations in the endobronchial space of patients with cystic fibrosis. This is also where chronic infections are taking place in these patients. So even if the peptide is delivered by inhalation, therefore in a rather topical manner, there is still an opportunity with a prodrug to prevent toxicity in the upper airways and to concentrate the activity of the peptide at the site of infection, the endobronchial space. Using neutrophil elastase sensitive prodrugs, we have shown that we can control the activity of the peptide and limit it to the sites of infections where neutrophil elastase is found. The prodrug candidates used were also 15 to 20 times less toxic than their parent peptides against host cells. And in collaboration with the company Airgen, we showed that these products can be aerosolized and ultimately could be delivered efficiently to the lungs of cystic fibrosis patients. In terms of the reduction in the toxicity of these peptides, we also compared the results obtained with the parent peptide reported as being non-toxic in its active form. Indeed, in vitro, we could not see any difference in toxicity between the active and prodrug peptides, both of them being non-toxic against two types of epithelial cells and neutrophils, and not inducing as well the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6. However, when tested in vivo, we observed that the active peptide induced a significant loss of weight in mice, which is not desirable, but this was not observed with the prodrug peptide. While there was no difference in the induction of IL-6 release in vitro, in vivo, however, the active peptide caused increased production of this pro-inflammatory cytokine. And this was also observed with TNF-alpha. One of the remaining problems of these AMP prodrugs, however, is that they are produced by significantly increasing the size of the peptide overall, as you can see it on the top right corner of the screen, where the original peptide is shown in red. This is the opposite of what is usually expected with peptide therapeutics, where reduction of the sequence is usually targeted. So at this stage, we turned our attention to peptide analogues such as peptidomimetics, which could be cheaper to produce. A peptidomimetic is a molecule which displays the same biological activity than a parent peptide, but is structurally different. This peptidomimetic conversion is one of the main approaches used to improve the drug-like properties of therapeutic peptide candidates. Another widely used approach to improve the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic properties of peptides is a conjugation to a polymer such as polyethylene glycol or PEG. PEG is described as a gold standard biocompatible polymer for pharmaceutical and medicinal applications. To generate novel peptide analogues, we considered whether we could combine these two popular techniques of peptide drug improvement, peptidomimetic conversion and PEGylation. PEG is a simple linear polyether polymer which is usually attached at one end of a peptide sequence. In fact, in PEG and a peptide, there is the same number of bonds separating the repeating units. So we envisaged that we could generate some peptidomimetics based on a PEG backbone, functionalized with side chains characteristic of amino acids. Accordingly, we called these novel peptidomimetics pegtides. For synthetic reasons, we initially focused on a peptide assembled from a single amino acid, which is the case of oligoarginine, the cell-penetrating peptide I mentioned earlier in this presentation. So we generated the peptide of oligoarginine, the two structures being shown here, and evaluated it for the delivery of nucleic acids, in particular a silencing RNA, by forming nanocomplexes between the nucleic acid and the peptide. In terms of cost of production first, we were able to reduce it by a factor of 30 compared to the parent peptide. In terms of biological activity, we observed that the peptide was not only more efficient than the parent peptide in the delivery of siRNA, but also superior to a lipid-based benchmark vector such as RNA-Effect, with up to 60% gene knockdown in epithelial cells. The latter are easy to transfect cells, so we also tested the peptidomimetic in difficult to transfect cells, such as neuronal cells, comparing to the reference vector lipofectamine. Under these conditions, the peptidomimetic was not as efficient than the lipid-based vector, but still allowing about 40% gene knockdown, not far from lipofectamine. Finally, we verified by high-content analysis that the peptidomimetic was not toxic at the concentration required for siRNA delivery, and this was confirmed for all the parameters recorded in these studies. Here, I only show the results of cell viability. So we have shown that a peptide of an homoamino acid peptide can be a peptidomimetic, and we are now extending this approach to peptides which are enriched in two main amino acids, which is the case of antimicrobial peptides. I will now conclude this webinar by presenting the project in the lab funded by SSPC. For IP reasons, I will only give a general overview. At present, most peptides are produced by an approach called solid-phase peptide synthesis, using FMOC-protected amino acids. This process is applied at the lab, but also the industrial scales. It involves a cycle of 4 steps for each amino acid added to the sequence of the peptide. This includes 2 reactions and 2 washing steps, all of them using DMF as the main solvent. In fact, the entire chemistry for peptide synthesis has been optimized with this solvent. However, DMF is now listed on the list REACH of the European Commission for Restricted Substances, and this is also the case for potential DMF substitutes such as NMP. In recognition of this potential threat to the future industrial production of peptides, several groups have searched for green alternatives to DMF. However, one problem is that peptide synthesis has been optimized with FMOC-protected amino acids. And because of the structure of the FMOC group shown here in purple, their solubility is essentially restricted to organic solvents. As an alternative approach, we are therefore investigating if a water-soluble protecting group can be used and could lead to the same performances than those achieved with the FMOC group. In turn, we will investigate if a water-compatible activation strategy can be implemented. This would allow the entire process to be potentially delivered in aqueous media, maybe including a small percentage of ethanol if required. Once this approach is developed using a traditional batch production method, we will aim to extend it to a flow approach. Peptide synthesis under flow conditions has indeed already showed that it can be more efficient than batch synthesis. By reducing the reaction times, the quantities of reagents needed, as well as to lead to high purity peptides in high yields. For example, when we started the lab 20 years ago, we were using a traditional batch synthesizer which elongated the peptide sequence by 1 amino acid every hour. We now use a microwave-assisted synthesizer working in batch conditions, which extends a sequence by 1 amino acid in less than 5 minutes. Recently, a lab in MIT reported the development of a peptide synthesizer working under flow conditions, which extends peptide sequences by 1 amino acid every 40 seconds. Finally, we plan to apply flow chemistry not only for the synthesis of peptides, but also for their conjugation. Peptide conjugates represent a large variety of hybrid structures, including nanomedicines and peptide antibody conjugates, as well as other examples seen earlier in this presentation. For peptide drug conjugates alone, while they have been developed much more recently and slowly than antibody drug conjugates, there is already 1 peptide drug conjugate in clinical use and 13 at various stages of clinical development. The problem with peptide conjugates is that the standard synthetic scales of some of their components often differ by at least one order of magnitude, which make the conjugation under batch conditions very challenging. We hope therefore that flow chemistry could address this limitation and are exploring this approach currently with two peptide small molecule conjugates and ultimately, if successful, with a peptide antibody conjugate. It now remains for me to thank again SSPC for organizing this webinar and for funding the latter project. I would also like to acknowledge the PhD and postdoctoral researchers who delivered the results shown in this presentation, the academic collaborators internally and externally, the international collaborators, and last but not least, the funding agencies which supported this research, in particular SFI, and finally yourself for your attention.